A lot to discuss. Let's bring in our panel here in the studio. Luis Carlos Battista is a Cuban lawyer. From Madrid, the president of Fuego Enterprises and editor-in-chief of OnCuba magazine, Hugo Cancio. And joining us from Havana is Carlos Alzugaray. He's a former Cuban diplomat and educator. Welcome to all of you. Let's go to Havana and start with Ambassador Alzugaray. Ambassador, what can you tell us about the man who's expected to be the next leader of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel?
Well, I think you have to take into account this person is highly educated. He was educated at a moment in Cuban history where the educational system worked very well. He has had a lot of experience in the Cuban political system. He has been youth leader, secretary of the party in a couple of provinces, minister of the government. So he probably is very well set up for dealing with the problems of the governance of Cuba. He is also of a generation of people who were born and raised in a country embargoed by the United States. And finally, he was raised in a period when Cuban socialism seemed to be working very well, although at those times Cuba was subsidized by the Soviet Union. But all these factors play into his formation as a leader.
Ambassador, you say he's got lots of experience. So in terms of leadership style and content, for that matter, can we expect continuity?
I think yes. I haven't thought a lot about that, but I guess he's very similar to Raúl Castro in that he is not always present in all the moment in publicly. Like, for example, Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro's style of leadership was very much associated with his capacity, with his oratory. Both Raúl Castro and Díaz-Canel are not precisely the size. They don't have certainly the capacity, oratorical capacity of Fidel Castro. In the case of Fidel Castro, oratory played a very important role in the way he led the country. So I think his leadership style will be more similar to Raúl Castro than to Fidel Castro.
Hugo, we've heard from our reporter that this represents a generational change, the leadership here in Cuba. Díaz-Canel has said that the next government in Cuba will be more responsive to the people. What do you make of that? What does that mean?
Well, you know, you got to take in consideration that Díaz-Canel was born after 1959 when the revolutionary process really started. So he's the son of the revolution, such as I am. He was educated by this revolutionary process, so he went through the same process and hardships due to the economic embargo imposed by the United States on Cuba. He went through all those processes that this generation, my generation, went through. So he's more in touch with reality than in my personal opinion, than his predecessors. He's been out there on the field, as Ambassador Alzugaray just mentioned. He was a leader in the province of Santa Clara. He was Minister of Education. So he had meaningful interaction with the everyday Cubans throughout his career. So he's more in touch with the reality of the 11.2, 11.5 million people that live and reside in Cuba. So hopefully, the expectation is that he will bring all that experience, all that meaningful contact with his people to the presidency, assuming that he will be the next president, the next leader of Cuba. He's also understands the historical controversy and conflicts with the neighbors of the North, the United States. So hopefully he will bring something inspiring. He will bring something new. The expectation is that he will, that although he will maintain and preserve some of the successes of his predecessors, he will also will implement a new agenda. A lot of people said, going back to your question earlier, whether with the shadow of Raúl Castro still in power as the leader of the Communist Party, whether he will whether Díaz-Canel will be able to be successful, assuming that he'll become the president. I go back to the comments and the rumors that people mentioned and said when Fidel Castro, due to his illness, stayed away from power and passed on the presidency to President Raúl Castro. A lot of people said Raúl Castro will not be able to do much with Fidel Castro on his shadow And look at what he did. He normalized diplomatic relationship with the United States. He allowed the President of the United States to come and visit Cuba and even speak live on national television. And he opened up economic reform, and he put forward a lot of reforms that are still taking place today. So there's a little bit of optimism, there's a little bit of enthusiasm at the fact that we're going to have a new president in a few weeks.
Luis, Díaz-Canel is 57 years old. He's a relatively young leader in Cuba, and I guess he's going to be around for a long time. Do you expect him to introduce any major initiatives on the part of the government in the years ahead?
I think so. I think he will have to. If we realize he's a 21st century president, and he has to deliver 21st century results for a 21st century people, Cuban people. So he will have to. I don't think that he will be in the sense of delivering major reforms in the next year or the next 2 years, because he will also have to deal with a different group of different views, even inside the party.
How much of a challenge is it going to be for him when he becomes president to deal with what Ambassador Alzugaray told us, two centers of power? On the one hand, Raul Castro remains head of or General Secretary of the Communist Party and head of the army. On the other hand, Díaz-Canel will be president.
So obviously he will be in the party, even as if we see him as president of Cuba, of the Council of State. He will be a member of the Politburo, and other members of the government, they will be also a member of the Politburo, like Foreign Affairs Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parrilla, Minister of Public Health Roberto Soberón. So again, I think he will have to deal with delivering results for the people and deliver better economy, but also have to manage the relationship with the rest of the party and the people who are more orthodox inside the party.
Ambassador Alzugaray, Díaz-Canel has already expressed his unhappiness with the fact that there's been such a deterioration in relations with the United States under President Trump. But do you expect that it could get better under him?
No, because it depends more on what's happening on the other side. I think the Cuban government, and Díaz-Canel is part of that, is in the same line that Raul Castro approached it. And I like very much what Hugo Cancio reminded us about what Raul did in terms of the relationship with the United States. Now, we are in the normalization process. No matter what President Trump says that he canceled it, no, the normalization process is there, maybe a little bit dormant, maybe not advancing as quickly as it was advancing under Obama, but it's still there. Now, it is in the interest of the Cuban government to continue that process. So Díaz-Canel will continue that, will continue pushing for the normalization process, and then, but he will be very pragmatic. He will probably not respond with the similar high rhetoric that is being characterized by Mr. Trump, but he will say things that are important, that are significant, but the Cuban government is reacting to everything that comes from the United States in a very pragmatic way. We had this week conversations on oil spills between the two governments. We had a delegation of Cuban Coast Guard attending exercises in Key West on the U.S. Coast Guard. So these things are going to continue, and the Cuban government is going to handle it very pragmatically. Of course, there will be moments when there will be problems. Right now, we're facing the Summit of the Americas next month. The idea that President Maduro can be barred from the summit. Obviously, Cuba takes another position. So we will have to see. But I think the Cuban government will be pragmatic, but at the same time firm in rejecting any attempt to impose on Cuba anything. In that, Díaz-Canel will be doing a continuity of what Fidel Castro did and what Raul Castro did.
Hugo, what is your view on the relationship with the United States? Do you see a chance here, an opening that it could improve, broadly speaking, in terms of the political relationship, the diplomatic relationship?
Well, as far as the Cuban government, I understand that the Cubans will continue to the Cubans will continue to engage into this normalization process that is going on. Aside from all the rhetoric coming from the White House, the conversations, the dialogue has continued as normal. President Trump is unpredictable. However, I'm still optimistic. I'm optimistic that this president, once Cuba becomes a priority, hopefully somebody within his administration will, in a few weeks, will tell him, Mr. President, are you aware that there's a transition in Cuba? There's a new president in Cuba, and his last name is not Castro. So hopefully Cuba will come on his agenda, and I'm looking forward to see what President Trump is going to do. He's pro-business. He had scouts in Cuba looking for business opportunities. He's running the White House as if he was running a corporation. You know, we have seen him go back and forth to the Cuba issue. To this day, even though he went from saying that he supported President Barack Obama's Cuba policy, but he was going to make a better deal, he went from saying that to saying he was going to reverse all of their policies, and so far he has done just very little. So I'm hopeful that with the new administration, with the new president in Cuba, a young president that represents a new generation, a new future, change, everything that's new is always good, and inspires people. I hope that the White House and the president will get inspired and engage in communication with the new leader in Cuba and see where that leads us. So we can only hope and wait and see what's going to happen in a few weeks.
Okay, we are going to take a quick break right now. You're watching The Heat. We'll be back in a moment.